You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 269. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. If you ask me what one of the key skills is to have an effective time management system as a lawyer, I would say that one of the foundational skills is the art of getting yourself back on track. No matter how good your systems are, you can expect that there will be times in your practice where you fall off track. And the ability to pull yourself back on track is key to maintaining a practice that feels organized, structured, and sustainable. So this week and over the next 3 weeks that follow, I am going to take you through a 4-part framework to help you with the art of getting back on track. There are, as I mentioned, 4 parts to this series. The first is today's episode, which is getting back on track and understanding why your time management systems fail. Next week, when you come back, we're going to talk about the difference between success and failure. There is one key ingredient, and we're going to focus on that next week. After that, we're going to focus on how to recover after a setback. So what is the step-by-step how-to, right? You've fallen off track. You've managed to find that one key ingredient that is going to get you back on track. And now you want the steps to do that. And then finally, in week 4, we're going to talk about how to make your practice sustainable. So many lawyers come to me and they just want a practice that feels sustainable. So we're going to talk about getting back on track from that lens. So I'm thrilled that you're here with me this week because this very first part of the series is essential to setting the groundwork for the framework. And we are diving into a topic that comes up frequently with lawyers that I speak to where they have systems, right? Those systems work really, really well for a period of time. And then they find that those systems are no longer working. And so we're going to dive into why that is today. And I'm going to offer up 3 main points. So diving into the first point is number 1 is I want to set the expectation that no matter how good your systems are, at some point they are going to fail. This to me is a very key point. To me, this is the headline. And if you take only one thing from this series, please let it be that you can expect that your time management systems will fail, no matter how good they are. I had a coach say this to me once. I was taking a training. It was ADHD specific. And in that context, we talked about how boredom can be a reason for system failure, right? The notifications that once spoke to you no longer speak to you. You can ignore them. Practices, calendars, things that once felt novel no longer feel that way. You start to get bored of your system. So that was the context in which we were talking about how you can expect your systems to fail. And yet what I've witnessed in my coaching practice, what I have experienced myself, is that yes, your systems are going to fail, and they're going to fail for a number of reasons. And when you accept that they are going to fail, it is like the crystallization, an aha moment of, okay, that's great. Your system doesn't have to be perfect. If you fall off track, nothing has gone wrong. All it means is that you've encountered a system that no longer works for whatever reason. And then we get to go about the process of getting back on track. So if you're in the boat where you have already fallen off track, or in the past, you can think of times when you have fallen off track, or you're kind of getting there right now, this is so validating because it is so normal and it is to be expected. And so you're absolutely in the right place because now we get to talk about what you get to do about it when you fall off track, right? There's no more stigma. There's no more concerns. There's no more worries. No matter what your systems, no matter how good they are, you are going to fall off track at some point or another. And that is okay. Now, I've already mentioned a little bit of why that might be. And in my coaching practice, I have hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with lawyers about time management. And what I can tell you is that falling off track is not just for lawyers who are not particularly organized or who don't have good systems or who let their systems go. To the contrary, the lawyers who are conscientious and hardworking and have a practice that is busy and they go through ebbs and flows, everybody has times where their practice feels like they have fallen off track. And for today's episode, I boil it down to three main categories. These are common categories that I see. And the reason I'm setting it up this way is because you may see yourself in one of these categories. So the first main category is big changes that are temporary. So if you are a litigator and you have a trial and you are going full on during the course of your trial, it is all hands on deck. You don't need motivation because you have so much on your to-do list that you just have to keep working. And that goes on maybe for a few days, weeks, months. And when you're done, there's this level of fatigue and exhaustion, a crash almost that sets in. And you get back to your workplace and you're trying to work and you can't, and you're trying to figure out why. And you're tired. You have work that has piled up while you've been in trial. Maybe you haven't been keeping your calendar up to date because you've been so focused on the trial, and you really feel that sense of being unsettled, right? You have fallen off track. Now, if you're not a litigator, you're a solicitor, but you have deals that are similar or some period in your life that feels that way, I can tell you that here I am recording this episode early July. That was me at the end of June. There was a huge push at work and for my kids' school. And so there was all this stuff happening. And then July set in and I had a very odd drop in terms of the level of activity that I was doing in my business and for my children. And also we transitioned into summer. And so there was this shift and it's unsettling, right? I felt off track. And so you probably can relate to a really busy period at work, a really busy period in your professional life or personal life. And all of a sudden there's a shift in that, and that can create this feeling of being off track. Now, sometimes it's a vacation, right? You go on vacation, you're gone for a week or two, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe longer. And you're in vacation mode, right? You've really disconnected from your professional work. And when you step back into the saddle, it feels off, right? It's hard to fit back in. You ask yourself how you managed to sustain the pace that you had before you went on vacation, especially if a few days or weeks before vacation, you were busily scrambling to get everything ready so that you could take that vacation. So if you're in that boat, then it makes perfect sense that you might find yourself feeling off track. Now, other large and temporary situations that can create that feeling of being off track is sometimes if you're really slow at work, right? For myself, I like to always be a little bit over capacity. That makes me feel motivated and I always have something to do. If work slows down, it can feel really uncomfortable, right? You might struggle to get motivated. So you might actually find that even though you have all this time to get your work done, you're not getting it done, right? There's too much time. You're not productive. You're not motivated. And so that can create that feeling of being off track. And then finally, God forbid, if you get sick, right? You've got an illness for a few days or a few weeks, that can really throw things off for you. If you've got family members that you care for, whether they're children or your parents, and they are sick and you're taking time off to look after them, that can also really throw you off track, right? Because now your schedule is really bouncing around and it's unpredictable. And so it creates that feeling of being off track. Now, I mentioned there were a couple of other categories that can lead to you feeling like your time management systems are getting off track, that you yourself are getting off track. And those are big changes that are permanent. So the big changes I mentioned a minute ago, those are all relatively temporary, but there are changes that you'll experience that are much more permanent in nature. So in your professional context, for example, you might find that there's a shift in your role. You may increase the level of responsibility. Maybe you go from being primarily an individual contributor to managing more team members, and that creates a shift in the way that you practice, such that systems that worked really well for you before no longer work very well for you. It might be that you enter into a new job, a new position where everything is different and the systems that you used before are not conducive to managing your time in this new role. So those are examples at work where there's a permanent change. It's a big change. And the things that worked, the things that got you here are not going to get you there. Now, it could also be life circumstances that are new, right? You may move away from your physical office. There is still an expectation that you be at work for a certain number of days per week. And maybe it's adding a commute of several hours to your week. And now you've got to figure out how you're going to adjust your schedule to allow for this commuting time, right? It could be that you have children, right? For so many of my fellow lawyers and colleagues who have children who require care, right? And this begins the minute they're born, right? Things really shift in terms of your lifestyle because now you've got little humans that are your responsibility. And as they grow up, the responsibilities shift, but the responsibilities are still there. So this is a very permanent change that will really alter the way that you manage your time. You're no longer managing your time for you and maybe for your partner and for your friends and your family and social life. You're managing your calendar in a way that people are very dependent on you. That is a big shift in your calendar. And of course, that can make you feel off track. Now, I mentioned there were 3 categories, and this third category I've already alluded to in the sense of getting bored with your systems, right? The systems that you had no longer work, and it could be that nothing has really shifted outside, right? There hasn't been a big trial, there hasn't been a big life change, but your systems themselves stop working. And we all know that feeling, right? Where something that worked really well for you doesn't really work quite as well anymore. And that can be the accumulation of little tiny shifts that simply add up over time, right? So if you notice that the notifications that really worked well 3 weeks ago no longer work, it could be that you've just started ignoring them. They don't register with you anymore. It might be this idea of slippage, right? These little tiny things that you used to do that were really, really helpful, right? Maybe every morning when you sat down to work, you would plan out your day, you'd have a checklist and you'd follow the checklist, and then you stopped doing that because you had a project that you were working on. You didn't need to do it quite as much. And then you just stopped doing that altogether. You might find that that's something that happens outside of work as well, right? If you've got a really consistent gym routine or running routine and you stop doing that routine and you initially don't really notice, you still feel pretty good, but then a few weeks into it, you start to feel a bit more tired. You try to get back into the habit and it feels a lot harder to do, right? You've sort of fallen out of it and it didn't happen overnight. It was kind of here and then there. It's like, you're eating the chocolate chip cookie before bed every night and it's all fun and games until one day you go to put your suit pants on and you're like, wait a second, like this isn't working. So it's the small, tiny little slippages, right? The little things here and there that in the moment don't feel like a big deal, but when they add up over time and when the systems shift over time, then you eventually notice, hey, wait a second, like I just don't feel right. Like this practice doesn't feel good to me. And so this is another area where understanding, right? This is understanding why your systems are going to fail. So just to step back for a minute and recap where we are. This episode is all about understanding why time management systems fail in the first place, how it is that you find yourself getting off track. And the first key headline really is that you can expect your systems are going to fail. No matter what, no matter how good they are going to fail. It is the reason why the first thing that you do on an airplane, on a flight, is you go through the procedure of what would happen if the airplane were to crash. God forbid that ever would happen, but you want to be prepared for it. And it is the same thing here. We want to have the expectation that your time management systems are going to stop working in some fashion or another. And that is to be expected and that is to be okay. And that is why you are here with me, because we're going to talk about why it's happening, right? That's what we're doing this week. And then we're going to talk about how we're going to get back on track. So as I mentioned, the first point was we're going to expect that. The second point is that there are a number of reasons why your systems are going to fail. We talked about big temporary reasons like a really busy period at work, a really slow period at work, a vacation, or an illness. We talked about permanent big changes like a move or a new job, becoming a parent for the first time or the second time even. We talked about that third example of that slow attrition, right? That slow drift over time. And then finally, the third key point of today's podcast episode is for you to understand whether you are right now off track or at some point in the future you are off track, is to understand why. Why is it that you have come off track? Which of these reasons resonates with you? If it's not one of these reasons, then what is that reason for you? And the reason that we want to know why it is happening for you is because a well-defined problem is a problem half solved. And so if we can get to the root of it, if we can understand what flavor of getting off track you are experiencing, then that narrows the scope. It narrows the job that we have to help you get back on track. So that is this week's episode. These episodes are going to be relatively short and sweet. The idea is to get you thinking about each component, each part of this framework. So this week we talked about why it is that you fall off track, right? That this is a completely normal part of practice. And when you join me next week, we are going to talk about the biggest differentiator between those who get back on track and those who do not. So thank you for joining me here this week. It's been really great having you here. And if you have any questions about this topic, or if you yourself are experiencing that pain, right, that difficulty, that struggle of falling off track, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. I would absolutely love to help you. So with that, I'm going to wish you a great week. I hope this has been a good episode for reflection, and I'll look forward to reconnecting again next week, where we talk about that differentiator. What is it that differentiates those who get back on track versus those who do not? Thanks for joining. Talk to you soon. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.